Germany in the early 20th century was a nation in turmoil. The devastation of World War I, the harsh conditions of the Treaty of Versailles, and a crippled economy left millions struggling to survive. From this chaos, a radical movement emerged, one that would rise to absolute power and plunge the world into another devastating war. This is the story of how the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party, took control of Germany and changed history forever.
Welcome to History Corner.
November 1918, the Great War ends and Germany is left in ruins. The signing of the Treaty of Versailles in June 1919 is meant to establish peace, but for Germany, it is nothing short of a disaster. The treaty imposes severe territorial losses. Germany loses 13% of its land, including Alsace-Lorraine to France, West Prussia, and Posen to Poland, and its overseas colonies. Millions of ethnic Germans now find themselves living under foreign rule. The most crushing blow, however, comes in the form of economic reparations. Article 231, known as the War Guilt Clause, places full responsibility for the war on Germany, making it liable for 132 billion gold marks, an astronomical sum, equivalent to hundreds of billions in today's money. Payments begin immediately, straining an already shattered economy. To meet these demands, Germany resorts to printing money, leading to hyperinflation. By 1923, the German mark is virtually worthless. Workers are paid with wheelbarrows full of cash, and families burn banknotes for heat because they are cheaper than firewood. Adding to this humiliation, Germany's military is gutted. The Reichswehr is limited to 100,000 troops, too small to defend the country. The Navy is reduced to a token force. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the armistice of November 11, 1918, required the German Navy to surrender most of its fleet. The ships were not confiscated but interned at Scapa Flow under British supervision, while the Allies decided their fate in post-war negotiations at the Treaty of Versailles. From November 1918 to early 1919, 74 German warships, including 11 battleships, 5 battlecruisers, and numerous cruisers and destroyers, were anchored at Scapa Flow under a skeleton crew of about 1,800 men, commanded by Rear Admiral Ludwig von Reuter. The crews lived in deteriorating conditions with limited supplies and no real purpose. By mid-1919, von Reuter feared that the Allies, especially Britain and France, would seize the fleet and divide the ships among themselves. The Treaty of Versailles was still being finalized, and he incorrectly believed the armistice had expired and that hostilities might resume. Rather than allow the fleet to be used by enemy nations, he decided to destroy it. On June 21, 1919, while most British forces were away on a training exercise, von Reuter issued a secret order to his men. Paragraph 11, confirm. This was the prearranged code to scuttle the entire fleet. At midday, German crews opened sea valves, sabotaged engines, and breached hulls, ensuring their ships would sink. By 5 p.m., 52 of the 74 ships had sunk or were irreparably damaged. Despite British efforts, most of the fleet was lost. The scuttling infuriated the British. Many ships were later salvaged and scrapped, with some wrecks still visible today, making Scapa Flow a major diving site. Von Reuter was briefly imprisoned, but later released. The scuttling influenced post-war naval treaties, ensuring Germany would never again possess a powerful fleet for decades. The German Air Force is outright banned. The loss of military pride fuels resentment, particularly among veterans like Adolf Hitler, who see the treaty as a betrayal. As economic misery deepens and national pride is shattered, many Germans look for someone to blame and someone to fix their nation. Amid this unrest, a small political group known as the German Workers' Party is formed in Munich. In 1919, a young Austrian veteran named Adolf Hitler joins its ranks. He quickly rises to prominence, transforming the group into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, or Nazi Party. Their message is clear: Germany has been betrayed by foreign powers, communists, and Jews. Only through nationalism and strength can the country be restored. The roots of socialism can be traced back to the 18th century, when thinkers began questioning inequality and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the elite. One of the earliest voices of social critique was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose writings on inequality and democracy inspired revolutionary ideas. Rousseau's belief that private property was the root of social inequality laid the groundwork for later socialist thought. He envisioned a society where cooperation, rather than competition, guided economic life. The French Revolution from 1789 to 1799 furthered these ideals, as revolutionaries sought to abolish the privileges of the aristocracy, though the revolution ultimately led to new power struggles. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, socialists split into two main camps. Revolutionary socialists believed capitalism had to be violently overthrown. Reformist socialists, like the German Social Democratic Party (SPD), believed socialism could be achieved gradually through democratic means. Hitler and the Nazis' brand of socialism was a perverted system that bared no resemblance to either. Where revolutionary and reformists sought public ownership of key industries, wealth redistribution, and policies benefiting the working class, the Nazis supported state intervention in the economy, but kept private industry intact, favoring big business if it served the Nazi state. Where revolutionary and reformist prioritizes class struggle, poor versus rich, workers versus capitalists, the Nazis prioritize race struggle, Aryans versus Jews, Slavs, and other undesirables. Where revolutionary and reformist sought violent overthrow of capitalism or working within democratic systems for gradual change, the Nazis worked for a totalitarian dictatorship, destroyed democracy, banned opposition, and ruled through terror and propaganda. Revolutionary and reformist were typically anti-war and focused on international workers' solidarity. The Nazis were extremely militaristic, aiming for territorial expansion and world domination. Hitler and his supporters believed that if they took control of Bavaria, they could then march on Berlin and overthrow the national government. He secured the support of prominent right-wing figure, General Erich Ludendorff, a World War I hero who lent credibility to the coup. Their plan was to kidnap government officials, declare a national revolution, and rally support from the military and police. On the night of November 8, 1923, Hitler and 600 of his SA stormtroopers stormed the Bürgerbräukeller, a large beer hall in Munich where Gustav von Kahr, the Bavarian prime minister, was delivering a speech. There were 3,000 in attendance. Hitler fired a gun into the ceiling and declared a national revolution. He forced Kahr and other officials at gunpoint to pledge their support. Meanwhile, Ludendorff arrived, believing the army would back them. At first, it seemed as though the coup might succeed, but behind the scenes, Kahr and other officials quickly withdrew their support once released. The next morning, November 9, 1923, Hitler, Ludendorff, and 2,000 Nazi supporters marched through Munich, hoping to seize key buildings. But the police were waiting for them near the Feldherrnhalle, a military monument. The police ordered them to stop, but the Nazis continued forward. Gunfire erupted, killing 16 Nazis and 4 police officers. Hitler fell and dislocated his shoulder, while Ludendorff walked forward unharmed, believing no one would shoot at him. The coup had failed completely. After fleeing, Hitler was arrested 2 days later and put on trial for treason. However, instead of being silenced, he used the trial as a platform to spread his ideology. He denounced the Weimar Republic as illegitimate. He portrayed himself as a patriotic hero, claiming he only wanted to save Germany. Instead of a death sentence, Hitler received a lenient 5-year prison term. Hitler served only 9 months in prison. During this time, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, outlining his hatred of Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles, his belief in Lebensraum, living space, the idea that Germany needed to expand eastward, his realization that a violent coup would not work. He needed to gain power legally through elections. Although the putsch had failed, it became a legendary event for the Nazi movement. The 16 Nazis killed were honored as martyrs. Every November, Nazi Germany held annual commemorations of the failed coup. Hitler's trial and imprisonment gave him nationwide fame, setting the stage for his legal rise to power in the 1930s. After the failed coup attempt, Hitler changes tactics. The Nazis will no longer attempt to seize power by force. They will do it legally. During the mid-1920s, the German economy stabilizes and Nazi support wanes. But Hitler is patient. He builds his party's organization, refines its propaganda, and expands its paramilitary wing, the SA or stormtroopers, who engage in violent street battles against communists and political opponents. The SA was founded in 1920 as the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party. Its origins can be traced to the Freikorps, a group of ex-soldiers and right-wing militias who fought against communists and revolutionaries in Germany after World War I. Many Freikorps members joined the SA, bringing with them military discipline and brutal tactics. The SA's main role was to protect Nazi rallies, disrupt political opponents, and intimidate Jews, communists, and socialists. Even though they themselves were socialists, they became known as brown shirts because of their distinctive brown uniforms, inspired by surplus World War I military clothing. By the late 1920s, the SA had grown into a massive force under the leadership of Ernst Röhm, a close ally of Hitler. Then, in 1929, disaster strikes. The Wall Street crash plunges the world into an economic depression, and Germany is hit hardest. Unemployment soars to over 6 million, and the government struggles to maintain order. People lose faith in democracy, searching for a leader who promises stability. Hitler seizes the moment. He offers simple solutions to complex problems: blame the Jews, crush the communists, restore Germany's former glory. His speeches draw massive crowds, and Nazi membership skyrockets. The Nazis' path to power was marked by a calculated electoral strategy aimed at exploiting the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic's political system. In the 1930 election, amidst the economic turmoil of the Great Depression, the Nazi Party capitalized on public discontent. They increased their representation from 12 to 108 seats, becoming the second largest party in the Reichstag. This surge was fueled by promises to revive the economy, restore national pride, and dismantle the Treaty of Versailles. By July 1932, the Nazis had become the largest party in the Reichstag, securing 230 seats. However, they lacked an absolute majority, and political fragmentation prevented the formation of a stable government. Despite their electoral success, President Paul von Hindenburg was reluctant to appoint Hitler as chancellor. In the subsequent November election, the Nazis experienced a slight decline, winning 196 seats. The political deadlock persisted, and the Weimar government's instability deepened. On January 30, 1933, under pressure from conservative elites who believed they could control him, Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor. It is a decision that will change the course of history. Once in power, Hitler called for new elections in March 1933. The campaign was marred by violence and intimidation, orchestrated by the SA and SS. A month later, the Reichstag building goes up in flames. The Nazis blame the communists and use the crisis to push through the Reichstag Fire Decree, which suspends civil liberties and allows mass arrests of political opponents. Within hours of the fire, Hitler convinced President Paul von Hindenburg to sign an emergency decree under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, known officially as the Decree for the Protection of the People and the State. This decree gave Hitler and the Nazi government sweeping powers to suppress opposition. The decree effectively suspended civil liberties across Germany. The key measures included elimination of free speech and press. Newspapers critical of the Nazis were shut down. Public dissent became illegal. Suspension of personal freedoms. Citizens could be arrested without a warrant, held indefinitely, and denied legal defense. Abolition of privacy. Mail, phone calls, and homes could be searched without cause or consent. Censorship and control. The government had the power to restrict political publications and ban meetings of opposition groups. Emergency police powers. The Nazis, with support from the SA and SS, began mass arrests of communists, socialists, and other political enemies. With the decree in place, the Nazis launched a brutal crackdown. 4,000 communists and socialists were arrested within days, including Reichstag members of the Communist Party of Germany, KPD. Leading communist Ernst Thälmann, one of Hitler's most vocal opponents, was arrested and later executed. Political violence escalated, with Nazi paramilitary groups storming opposition headquarters, beating and killing political adversaries. The first concentration camps, such as Dachau, were established to imprison political enemies. The decree remained in effect until the fall of Nazi Germany in 1945, effectively ending any remaining democratic freedoms. It was the first major legal step in Hitler's totalitarian rule. With opposition crushed and public fear at an all-time high, Hitler used this crisis to push through the Enabling Act in March 1933, giving him absolute power. The Reichstag fire decree was the final nail in the coffin for German democracy. With civil liberties suspended and opposition eliminated, Hitler had successfully transformed a democratic republic into a dictatorship. The flames of the Reichstag fire were not just the burning of a building, they were the burning away of freedom itself. SPD, the Social Democratic Party, leaders immediately condemned Hitler's actions, warning that he was dismantling democracy. But their resistance came to a head on March 23, 1933, when the Reichstag voted on the Enabling Act, a law that would give Hitler absolute power, allowing him to rule by decree. The SPD was the only party to stand against it. Otto Wels, the SPD's leader, delivered a defiant speech declaring, "You can take our lives and our freedom, but you cannot take our honor. We are defenseless, but not without honor." The SPD was outnumbered. The Enabling Act passed overwhelmingly, with support from conservatives, nationalists, and even the Catholic Center Party. This law effectively ended democracy in Germany. With the Enabling Act in place, Hitler moved quickly to eliminate all opposition. The SPD, now the last legal opposition party, was targeted immediately. In May 1933, stormtroopers raided SPD offices, seizing funds, destroying newspapers, and arresting members. In June, the SPD was officially banned, declared an enemy of the people and the state. Trade unions, many of which were aligned with the SPD, were dissolved and replaced by the Nazi-controlled German Labor Front. Their literature was burned in Nazi book burnings, and any dissent was met with arrest, torture, or execution. The Nazi book burnings were a key part of their efforts to control public thought and eliminate ideas they considered dangerous or un-German. The most infamous took place on May 10, 1933, when Nazi student groups, supported by the government, organized mass burnings of books across Germany. These events were orchestrated by the German student union Deutsche Studentenschaft under the slogan "Gegen wider den undeutschen Geist," against the un-German spirit. The Nazis targeted books that promoted ideas they deemed subversive, including Jewish authors, such as Sigmund Freud, Franz Kafka, and Heinrich Heine; Marxist and socialist literature that differed from theirs; pacifist and anti-war works; liberal and democratic thinkers; books on sexuality and psychology. The largest book burning took place in Berlin's Opernplatz, now Babelplatz, where over 20,000 books were thrown into the flames as students, professors, and Nazi officials cheered. Similar events happened in Munich, Frankfurt, Dresden, and other cities. The Nazis viewed these books as a threat to their ideology and sought to create a uniform, obedient society. Burning books was a symbolic act of purging dissent, reinforcing state control over knowledge and culture. Heinrich Heine, one of the burned authors, famously wrote in 1821, "Where they burn books, they will also, in the end, burn people." This prophecy tragically came true under Nazi rule. With the SPD outlawed, the Third Reich became a one-party dictatorship. To gain public support, the Nazis turned to a powerful tool, propaganda. With Joseph Goebbels as their chief propagandist, they create a highly sophisticated media strategy that targeted every segment of German society. Posters and pamphlets. Nazi posters flood the streets, depicting Hitler as a strong leader who will restore German glory. Jews and communists are portrayed as dangerous enemies who threaten the nation. Mass rallies. Huge, theatrical rallies are organized featuring carefully staged speeches, banners, and torches to create a sense of unity and power. The Hitler myth. Goebbels crafts an image of Hitler as the savior of Germany, a man of the people who sacrifices everything for his country. Radio and film. The Nazis begin using radio broadcasts to reach millions, ensuring their message is heard in every home. Films and newsreels reinforce Nazi ideology, turning ordinary Germans into devoted followers. Children's indoctrination. The Nazis understood that controlling the future meant controlling the minds of children. Hitler and his regime implemented a systematic approach to indoctrinating German youth through education, propaganda, and youth organizations. The Nazi government overhauled the German school system to align with its ideology. Subjects like history, biology, and literature were rewritten to emphasize Aryan superiority, nationalism, and militarism. Schools taught children that Jews were inferior and a threat to Germany. Math problems involved calculating the cost of keeping undesirables in society. All teachers had to swear allegiance to Hitler and join the National Socialist Teachers League. Dissent was not tolerated. Youth organizations became mandatory and served as training grounds for future Nazi soldiers and homemakers. Hitler Youth. Boys underwent intense military training, learned Nazi ideology, and were taught to be loyal to Hitler above all else. League of German Girls. Girls were trained to be obedient wives and mothers, learning domestic skills and physical fitness. Severing family ties. Children were encouraged to report parents or teachers who spoke against the Nazis, weakening family bonds in favor of state loyalty. By the late 1930s, Nazi youth programs increasingly focused on preparing boys for war. Physical fitness, strength and endurance training mimicked military exercises. Weapons training. Older boys were taught to use firearms and engage in combat drills. Glorification of violence, war was portrayed as heroic, and dying for the Führer was considered the highest honor. By the time World War II began, the Nazis had successfully created a generation of fiercely loyal, ideologically hardened youth. Many became soldiers, SS officers, or party officials. Through fear, repetition, and emotional appeal, Nazi propaganda turns frustration into fanaticism, transforming Hitler from a fringe agitator into a national figure. With fear gripping the nation, Hitler proposes the Enabling Act granting him dictatorial powers. The Reichstag, under Nazi intimidation, approves it. Democracy is dead. By mid-1934, Adolf Hitler had consolidated much of his power, but his grip on Germany was still not absolute. One of his biggest threats came from within his own party, specifically from the SA Sturmabteilung, also known as the Brown Shirts. The SA, led by Ernst Röhm, had been crucial in Hitler's rise to power. They were his street fighters, intimidating political opponents, clashing with communists, and helping Hitler appear as a strong leader. By 1934, the SA had grown into a massive paramilitary force of over 3 million men, far larger than the 100,000-man German army, Reichswehr, permitted under the Treaty of Versailles. However, Röhm had his own ambitions. He wanted the SA to replace the Reichswehr and become the official army of Nazi Germany. He also advocated for a second revolution, where Nazi policies would move toward a more socialist, anti-capitalist agenda, an idea that clashed with Hitler's growing ties to Germany's business elite and conservative military leaders. The Reichswehr and conservative politicians viewed Röhm as a major threat. Many inside the Nazi Party, including Hermann Göring, Heinrich Himmler, and Joseph Goebbels, saw an opportunity to eliminate him and gain more power for themselves. Himmler and Göring were feeding Hitler false reports, claiming that Röhm was plotting a coup against him. Hitler, already suspicious of Röhm's growing power, decided to act before Röhm could move against him. At dawn on June 30th, Hitler flew to Munich and personally oversaw Röhm's arrest at a lakeside hotel. SA leaders across Germany were rounded up by the SS, Schutzstaffel, and Gestapo. Ernst Röhm was taken to Stadelheim prison, where he was given a pistol and ordered to commit suicide. When he refused, SS officers shot him dead. Other high-ranking SA officials, including Karl Ernst, Edmund Heines, and Peter von Heydebreck, were executed within hours. Gustav Ritter von Kahr, the Bavarian politician who had thwarted Hitler's beer hall putsch in 1923, was also murdered in an act of revenge. The purge quickly expanded beyond the SA. Hitler used the opportunity to eliminate rivals and political opponents. Gregor Strasser, a former Nazi who had split from Hitler over policy differences, was murdered in prison. Kurt von Schleicher, a former chancellor of Germany, and his wife were gunned down in their home. Hundreds of SA officers and suspected dissidents were arrested, tortured, and executed. In total, at least 85 people were officially killed, though estimates suggest the true number was in the hundreds. On July 3, 1934, the Nazi-controlled German government retroactively legalized the murders, calling them necessary to suppress treason. Hitler defended his actions in a speech to the Reichstag. In this hour, I was responsible for the fate of the German people, and thereby I became the supreme judge of the German people. The purge sent a clear message. No one, not even Nazis, were safe from Hitler's wrath. 1 month later, on August 2, 1934, President Hindenburg died. Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer of Germany. The day before, Hitler received word that Hindenburg was on his deathbed. He then had the cabinet pass the law concerning the head of state of the German Reich, which stipulated that upon Hindenburg's death, the office of president would be abolished and its powers merged with those of the chancellor under the title of Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and chancellor of the Reich. 3 hours after Hindenburg's death, it was announced that as a result of this law, Hitler was now both Germany's head of state and head of government, thereby eliminating the last remedy by which he could be legally dismissed and cementing his status as the absolute dictator of Germany. Publicly, Hitler announced that the presidency was inseparably united with Hindenburg, and it would not be appropriate for the title to ever be used again. The Third Reich had fully begun. Now unchallenged, Hitler transforms Germany into a totalitarian state. The SS and Gestapo silence opposition through terror and surveillance. The press is strictly controlled. Schools indoctrinate children with Nazi ideology, and massive rallies reinforce Hitler's cult of personality. The Jews, long scapegoated by the Nazis, become the primary target. The Nuremberg laws strip them of citizenship and rights, paving the way for the horrors to come. By 1935, the Nazi regime had firmly consolidated power in Germany. Adolf Hitler and his government had already silenced political opposition through the Reichstag Fire Decree and the Enabling Act. Now, they turned their full attention to implementing their racial ideology, which was central to Nazi beliefs. For years, Jews in Germany had been targeted by propaganda, violence, and economic discrimination. However, Nazi leaders wanted to make their persecution official, giving it the weight of law to further isolate and marginalize Jewish citizens. The Nuremberg laws were primarily drafted by Wilhelm Frick, Minister of the Interior, and Bernhard Leusener, a legal expert on racial matters in the Interior Ministry. They were formulated under the direction of Adolf Hitler, who dictated the general principles of the laws. The laws were written and finalized in Nuremberg, Germany, just before the 7th Nazi Party rally in September 1935. Hitler personally announced them on September 15, 1935, at the rally in Nuremberg, leading to their name, the Nuremberg Laws. The two main Nuremberg laws. 1. The Reich Citizenship Law. This law revoked German citizenship from Jews, reclassifying them as subjects of the state rather than full citizens. Only individuals of German or related blood were allowed to be Reich citizens. Jews were denied voting rights, government jobs, and most legal protections. This law made Jews stateless, leaving them without basic rights in their own country. The Nazis defined who was considered Jewish based on ancestry rather than religion. Anyone with 3 or more Jewish grandparents was classified as a full Jew. Those with 2 Jewish grandparents who practiced Judaism or were married to a Jew were labeled Mischlinge, mixed race, with limited rights. This classification system forced Germans to prove their racial heritage with official documents, giving Nazi authorities complete control over defining Jewish identity. 2. The Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. This law banned marriages and sexual relationships between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. The goal was to protect so-called Aryan purity from being contaminated by Jewish blood. Key provisions of this law. Marriage between Jews and Germans was prohibited. Existing marriages were not annulled, but future marriages were strictly outlawed. Sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews were criminalized and punishable by imprisonment or forced labor. Jews were barred from hiring German women under 45 years old as domestic workers to prevent any possibility of relationships. Violators of these laws faced harsh penalties, including imprisonment in concentration camps. Social and economic isolation. The Nuremberg laws legally segregated Jews from German society, making them outsiders in their own country. Jewish professionals, including doctors, lawyers, and teachers, lost their jobs. Jewish children were expelled from German schools. Businesses were boycotted, and Jews were forced out of economic life. Public spaces, parks, theaters, and restaurants began banning Jews, reinforcing their exclusion from daily life. Though the Nuremberg laws were primarily for targeting Jews, they weren't the only ones persecuted under these laws. Romani or Gypsies and Black Germans were targeted as well. Like the Jews, Black Germans were stripped of citizenship rights and denied education and employment opportunities. They were excluded from military service and other public roles. Mixed-race children, often the offspring of African soldiers from the French occupation of the Rhineland, and German women, were especially targeted. The Nazis saw mixed-race children as a threat to their racial purity ideology. Under orders from Hermann Göring, hundreds of Black children were forcibly sterilized. This was part of the Nazi eugenics program aimed at eliminating so-called undesirable traits. Black Germans were portrayed in Nazi propaganda as inferior, primitive, or dangerous. The regime used racist caricatures in posters, newspapers, and films. Black prisoners, including those from occupied African territories, were subjected to forced labor, medical experiments, and brutal treatment. Black people from Africa, the Caribbean, and the U.S., such as diplomats, students, and performers, also faced discrimination and violence. Some were imprisoned, deported, or sent to camps. Though not targeted for genocide like Jewish people, Black Germans suffered under Nazi rule through sterilization, oppression, and imprisonment, with many perishing in the concentration camps. The Nuremberg laws emboldened anti-Semitic violence and had set the stage for even greater atrocities, paving the way for the Holocaust. Police and Nazi paramilitary groups increasingly attacked Jewish communities without fear of legal consequences. In October 1938, Nazi Germany began mass deportations of Jews. Over 17,000 Polish Jews living in Germany were forcibly expelled and left stranded at the border, denied entry by Poland. Among them was the family of Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Polish Jew living in Paris. Enraged by his family's suffering, Greenspan walked into the German embassy in Paris on November 7, 1938, and shot Ernst vom Rath, a German diplomat. Nazi leaders seized on the shooting as a pretext for violence. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, gave a fiery speech on November 9th, accusing the Jews of plotting against Germany. That night, orders were quietly given to launch a nationwide pogrom, an organized, state-sanctioned attack on Jewish communities. As darkness fell on November 9th, coordinated attacks erupted across Germany and Austria. SS officers, Hitler Youth, and civilians joined in the destruction. Over 7,000 Jewish-owned businesses were smashed and looted. More than 1,400 synagogues were burned to the ground. Jewish schools, hospitals, and cemeteries were vandalized. At least 91 Jews were murdered, and thousands were injured. German firefighters were ordered not to extinguish the flames unless Aryan properties were at risk. Police and authorities stood by or actively participated. The violence did not stop with physical destruction. In the days that followed, over 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps, primarily Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. Prisoners were subjected to torture, forced labor, and brutal treatment. Many were only released if they promised to leave Germany. In the wake of the destruction, the Nazi government blamed the Jews for the violence and imposed collective punishment. Jewish communities were fined 1 billion Reichsmarks, about $400 million USD at the time. Insurance payouts for Jewish businesses were confiscated by the Nazi state. Jewish children were expelled from public schools. Jewish-owned businesses were forced to close or be sold to Aryans at unfair prices. Aryanization. Kristallnacht marked a shift from legal persecution to outright violence. It was a test run for future atrocities, paving the way for the Holocaust. Many Jews attempted to flee Germany, but strict immigration policies in other countries made escape difficult. With total control at home, Hitler turns his focus outward. He defies the Treaty of Versailles, rebuilding Germany's military. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, he openly defied the treaty, dismantling its terms piece by piece. The world watched as Germany rearmed, expanded, and prepared for war, but the response was hesitant and divided. Hitler withdrew Germany from the League of Nations and the Geneva Disarmament Conference, refusing to accept military restrictions. He announced the reintroduction of conscription, expanding the army from 100,000 to 550,000 soldiers, an open violation of the treaty. German troops marched into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone since Versailles. Hitler annexed Austria, Anschluss, directly breaking the treaty's ban on German-Austrian unification. Each of these moves tested how far the world would let Hitler go. Britain's leaders saw the Treaty of Versailles as too harsh and believed Hitler was simply taking back what rightfully belonged to Germany. The British government, led by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, 1935–1937, and later Neville Chamberlain, 1937–1940, followed a policy of appeasement. Britain signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, allowing Germany to expand its navy, directly undermining the Treaty of Versailles. When Germany remilitarized the Rhineland, Britain took no action, believing Hitler was correcting an unfair clause of the treaty. Britain accepted the Munich Agreement, letting Hitler take over the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain famously declared, "Peace for our time," believing Hitler's ambitions were satisfied. How wrong he was. France had the most to fear from a resurgent Germany, but its response was paralyzed by political divisions and fear of another war. When Germany reoccupied the Rhineland, France's military was strong enough to stop them. But French leaders hesitated, unwilling to act without Britain's support. France went along with Britain at the Munich Conference, effectively abandoning Czechoslovakia. French citizens, still traumatized by World War I, overwhelmingly opposed another war. The United States, still dealing with the Great Depression, followed a strict policy of isolationism. Americans believed Europe's problems were not their concern, and Congress passed a series of neutrality acts, 1935–1937, to prevent U.S. involvement. FDR privately warned that Hitler was dangerous but lacked political support to take action. The U.S. focused on economic recovery and avoided foreign entanglements. When Germany violated Versailles, the U.S. response was minimal: no sanctions, no diplomatic pressure. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, viewed Germany's violations with caution. Hitler had openly declared his hatred for communism in Mein Kampf, but Stalin was reluctant to confront Germany alone. The USSR warned Britain and France about the Nazi threat, but was ignored. Stalin, sensing that Western democracies would not stop Hitler, signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a secret agreement with Germany to divide Eastern Europe. By 1939, Hitler had completely dismantled the Treaty of Versailles without firing a single shot. Each violation emboldened him further, showing that Britain, France, and the world would not resist his ambitions. Finally, in 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Britain and France declare war. The world is once again plunged into conflict. The rise of the Nazi Party was not inevitable. It was the result of economic hardship, political miscalculations, and the manipulation through lies, fear, and hate. Within a decade, Hitler transformed a fragile democracy into a brutal dictatorship. The lessons of history are clear. When fear overrides reason, when propaganda replaces truth, and when power is left unchecked, freedom is at great risk. The rise of the Nazis is a stark reminder of what happens when hate and lies go unchallenged.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories from history. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you next time.